In this week's episode of Matched Up, we're going to be taking a look at the number 4 ranked player in the world, Justin Thomas's golf swing. And this is one of my favorite swings on tour, and I think many people would consider Justin one of the best ball strikers in the game today. So there's some really unique matchups in his swing that I love, and this one's going to be a little different because you're going to see some things that if you follow me on Instagram or follow a lot of our other coaches, Shaheen, TJ Eaton, you hear us talking about things a little different than what JT's doing here. But nonetheless, it's a very effective swing, and I just want to explain to you why it's effective and how he's matching that up. So let's first talk about the backswing. And you hear us often talk about depth and getting a lot of rotation of the body and a lot of depth to the hand path here. And I would say that Justin thus far is pretty average. He's in that average range in terms of how much depth he's getting to the hand path. And so an easy way for us to kind of describe depth is if we look at a 90-degree line down from the lead shoulder, how much has the butt of the club traveled inward away from that lead shoulder. So when we talk about depth, that's basically what we're talking about, is that hand path moving inward. So not a lot of depth here early, a little bit. And then at this lead arm parallel position, I would consider him on the lower side of hand path depth. And then nearing the top, I would say very, very little hand path depth. So, you draw a straight line down from, his butt of the club, it's going to be crossing the middle of his foot somewhere. And for most of our guys, most amateur players, I like to see them somewhere back here, a little closer to the heel line, because it gives them a little bit better chance of shallowing the club. So you take a guy like JT, who's got a very high arm plane, not a lot of depth, but yet he finds a way to shallow that club out, because it doesn't matter what level of skill golfer you're talking about. If you look at any player in this position right here at this almost last parallel, you're going to see the sweet spot of the club tracking and traveling just gently back behind the hands. There aren't many good players who have the club out in front of their hands at that last parallel. So how's he doing that? How is he going from a position with very little depth to a relatively, what I would consider a relatively shallow position by the time he gets to that last parallel, which is one of the reasons why Justin can hit the ball so high, and he can really hit long irons high. And to top it off, he's also a good wedge player, so he's kind of the total package when it comes to ball striking here. Let's talk about those moves. He's got a couple of moves that he's making. And the first one that I want to illustrate is his wrist mechanics. And you'll notice if you look at the face-on view, Justin has what I would consider a very weak left-hand grip, which I'm kind of a big favor of. And from previous videos that the weaker the left hand is on the grip, the easier it is to get the left wrist into flexion, and the easier it is to get the left wrist into ulnar deviation. So if we look at this face-on view, he's made a nice shift into his right side. He hasn't turned the pelvis a whole lot. There's been a little bit more sway probably than there has been rotation. And that's one of the reasons why his arms kind of lift pretty high at the top. This next move is the move that I want you guys to pay really attention to. So when you hear us talk about ulnar deviation, if we look at this angle between the left arm and the shaft, okay, now if you start pitching and uncocking your wrist, that is basically moving that left wrist into ulnar deviation. And if that angle gets narrower and gets very laggy, which you see a lot of players do through extension and radial deviation, this is a steeper move, and then this is a shallower move. So Justin does a really nice job, because he's got such a high hand path with very little depth, of adding some ulnar deviation in the downswing. You actually see a visible sort of uncocking. If we look here, that first move in transition, you can see that center of mass of the club. And again, for our viewers, the center of mass is that point right along the shaft. Watch how it moves up. it moves up quickly in early transition. So he's putting a couple on that grip, which means a couple is just basically two opposing forces. We've got the left hand kind of pulling down, we've got the right hand kind of pushing up, and it creates a rotational torque on that club about that center of mass. So that center of mass moves up and around into that shallow position that we talk about. And so that's very visible in his swing. Let me back it up and I'll play the transition through for you. It's very visible in his swing. There's no laggy move coming out of transition. He's actually widening out that arc, lowering that sweet spot down behind him, and that's what allows him to come in with such a very shallow angle approach and some dynamic loft on the club. Now, he's in the classic position. He's got a flex left wrist. He's got the shaft leaning forward. He's controlling the dynamic loft, but he's not doing so with a lot of lag and radial deviation in this early phase of the swing. And so the second move, so that's the first move that allows him to lower that club down behind him. The second move, which is kind of a classic Justin Thomas move, is you see the right knee kind of kick in and you see the right heel come up. And what that move does is it has an effect on the tilt of the pelvis. So right now he's got a lot of inclination to the pelvis, but when he starts making this move of kicking this knee in, what we're going to see happen is that pelvis is going to level out just a little bit. Okay, and when it starts to level out, what that's going to do is actually change the force that he's applying to that handle very, very late down here in the downswing. When that knee starts to come in and that right heel starts to come up, that pelvis starts to level out, what's happening is it's actually changing the direction of that force and making it more in an outward fashion on that handle. And that's what allows for that club to kind of lay down and settle back behind his hands right there. And that's evident by if you drew a straight line down from his left shoulder, his hands are well outside that or well across that, which means there's been a decent amount of outward force toward the ball on that handle. And that's a move Justin's kind of made his whole life with this right knee and this right heel coming up. And there's a lot of coaches that may try to change that, but that's actually one of his functional pieces that allows him to get into this shallow delivery position and take it around the corner and have a very stable club base and a very solid strike. And he's also has the ability to work the ball in both directions. Now, interesting thing about his swing is, I followed his swing for a long time. Here's a video of his swing doing all the things that we kind of teach back in 2014. And so these swings are quite different. And I found this amazing. Like, here's a lot of depth to the hand path early. And so, this is more current on the left, 2014 on the right. You see a lot of depth, a lot of lead arm depth there at P3. Less. And then you get to the top, hands not quite as high, a little more depth to the butt of the club at the top. But he was not as good a ball striker back in 2014. These things weren't matching up. All this hand path depth and all this, you can see the shallowing move he puts on the club there. He's maintaining more lead arm depth in the downstroke on the right back in 2014. And the club's in a much shallower position. Now the problem is he wasn't able to match up body rotation and maintaining his tilts back in 2014 with this, because you can see he's still making the classic, Justin Thomas move where the right heel comes up and the right knee goes out. And again, that's going to level out the pelvis, and that's going to allow him to put that late outward force on that handle. The problem is the club's dropping too far behind him, and now the rate of closure has to speed up, and you can see this very kind of rolled release follow through. And I'm imagining that he was hitting a lot of big draws and had a lot of movement and curvature on his golf ball back in these days. So in one video over here on the left, this heel knee move is matching up perfectly with the depth of this lead arm. And then back in the old days when he had a lot of depth, it's not matching up. It's throwing the geometry of his swing way too far out to the right, where he's having to speed up that rate of closure and really kind of roll that face over. So the point and the beauty of this lesson is like everything in moderation, and not every golfer needs to do exactly the same thing. So my question is should we go back, keep Justin Thomas like he is on the right over here with all this depth, and then just change what he's doing with his lower body? Not necessarily, because the guy on the left is one of the best ball strikers in the world. But I think there's a lot of value in coaching if you're coaching Justin to understand, well, here's kind of his sweet spot. If he's going to make this move with his knee and his heel, then the lead arm depth needs to be somewhere about where it is right now, and that lead arm depth in the backswing needs to be somewhere it is right now, and that's what's going to allow him to be very functional and hit all the ball flights and be able to control the curve and the shape of the shots. So hope you guys enjoy this one. Again, this is one of my favorite swings on tour. Great dude, great golf swing, great player, and obviously it's incredibly well matched up.